Well, it looks like we're live. So I will introduce myself. This is David Thornburg, President and CEO of the Committee of 70, and welcome to Studio C70, which is our communication platform to talk with people from Pennsylvania and Philadelphia and around the country about issues related to strengthening our local democracy, again, here in Pennsylvania and also around the country. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Ashley Spillane. Ashley, thanks for joining us. Ashley is president and founder of an interesting social impact consulting firm in Washington called Impactual. More about her and our conversation in a minute. But for the time being, I just wanted to remind folks here in Pennsylvania that we have a primary election coming up on June 2nd. I hope you know that by now. This is an extraordinary election under extraordinary times. We've been encouraging folks to vote by mail, and people are hearing that call. Last I heard this morning, there were 1.8 million mail ballot applications out in Pennsylvania. And the challenge between now and Tuesday is to make sure that all those ballots get completed and filled in. And I'll make one reference to those of you who are in Philadelphia. I'm appearing in front of a virtual background, which is our Volkswagen at the Committee of 70. And the Volkswagen will be working with the City Commissioner's Office in Philadelphia to provide mobile drop-off services for people with last-minute mail ballots. I'll assure you that those ballots will be handled and picked up by the Board of Election staff, but we're doing what we can to make sure that people have those options accessible to them. So if you want to find out the locations, go to our website at 70.org, and we hope to see you at the Volkswagen. So Ashley, sorry about the extended introduction, the extended and self-serving introduction.
Hey, I'm excited about the Pennsylvania primary too.
Yeah, well, it's going to be like a primary and election season like we've never seen before. But we wanted to talk to you about your work, which is, to me, is kind of working a really interesting seam between, you could say, a public and private purpose. Your firm, Impactual, does really interesting work advising companies and nonprofit organizations on how to increase their social impact, particularly around issues of voting and civic engagement. And I will note two things in your bio. You and I both went to the Kennedy School, although years apart, I suspect. The one thing that I hold against you is that you're a New England Patriots fan. So both coming from Philadelphia and born and raised in Pittsburgh and a diehard Steelers fan, I mean, that should be like the end of the conversation right now, but I'll forgive you for that. So some of your work, well, I will always remember because the last board meeting that we had of the Committee of 70 in person, your colleague Lindsay Singleton presented your work. It was a case study that you did through Harvard about how companies can use efforts to promote civic engagement and voting and getting involved in elections as a way that's good for them, good for their employees, and good for the rest of us. So that was literally the last time I set foot in the office, March 12th. But just rewind a little bit and share with folks where that research came from, what you learned, how you're trying to apply those lessons in this election season.
Yeah, so we, I have worked in the civic engagement sector for almost my whole career. And before I founded Impactual, was the president of Rock the Vote, which is a nonprofit that engages young people in the political process, specifically working through cultural avenues, businesses and influencers coming together to help promote voter registration and voter participation. And in that role, I found that the power that companies have to really not only change our national culture of voting, to like turn the volume up on how important it is, and make it a thing that people want to engage, but also the unique ability that companies have to motivate their employees to go out and vote, and to help them make sure that they have the resources that they need, and the time off that they need. And so the case study was born out of this idea that there was a growing number of companies that were interested in doing this work and engaging in this way, doing nonpartisan voter engagement work, and that they didn't really quite know how to do it. And, we advise companies through our consulting firm to help them build out their programs. But for people who are sort of lower on the engagement ladder and want to jump in, we wanted to have a resource that would help them navigate the process and just understand the options of what you can do. I mean, it can be as simple as sending your employees an email that has certain links to remind them to register to vote, all the way to, giving time off or making election day a holiday for your office, and so on. So we wrote this case study in partnership with the Harvard Kennedy School, looking at what 8 different companies did in the 2018 election and their reflections on what worked, what didn't work, best practices that they could pass along to other folks. This is, what we saw in the case study is that this is one area of business people are pretty eager and willing to share and swap notes on.
Yeah.
There's a mutual rooting for everybody to have success and achieve good things in this realm. So
Yeah, I don't know if Lindsay reported back to you after that fateful March 12th meeting, but we actually at that time had just launched an effort we're calling We Vote, which is encouraging our board companies. We have 50 or so board organizations, companies, universities, hospitals, and so forth. And it resonates, I think, with a lot of the good work that you did, and particularly you use the same language that we do, which is that we're trying to promote a culture of voting, not just encourage people to vote. But for those that aren't steeped in this all the time, what do we mean by the culture of voting, and how do you, and you use the term, the sort of ladder of engagement that can kind of get you there, but how's that work?
So I have come to think of this work and the needs that we have as a country right now, and the ways companies can get involved, like I do football. I happen to be a football fan, but certainly everyone who watches the Super Bowl is not necessarily a fan, not necessarily personally invested in the outcome, but it is a cultural moment where we come together and we all engage in this behavior together. We watch it, we celebrate, we get together with family and friends, we make it festive. And my dream is that we turn election day into democracy's Super Bowl. That we are making this the thing to do, whether you have internalized how important it is or not. And I think that there are so many different things that companies can do on this. The companies that we looked at for the case study, it was a huge range of companies, from Twitter to Spotify to Snapchat, all the way to clothing companies like Gap and Patagonia, and Target, a big retail national brand, but also looked at what Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota was doing with their programming. And there were some very consistent threads throughout there in terms of what they found helped, gin up that excitement and enthusiasm for participation in their companies, both with their employees and with their consumers. And, from a starting place, a big barrier to participation in this country is education. And it's not education in some people feel like they don't know enough about the candidates or, the issues that are at stake to show up and vote. Other people just don't actually know about the process. So, Pennsylvania has an election coming up on Tuesday that has very different rules than Idaho that also does. We have a 50 state system where all of the states are allowed to make up their own rules, hold their deadlines on different days. So voter registration deadlines vary, absentee ballot request deadlines vary, whether a state has early voting periods or not varies. And so it can be a confusing process for voters. And companies have a really big role to play in just making sure that people have the information that they need to participate. And so finding ways to disseminate that and make sure that the dates are clear, the processes are clear. There are a ton of nonprofits and the states themselves now have a lot of digital resources available so that people can take these actions online rather easily. You can go to turbovote.org and get registered to vote. You can request your absentee ballot there. You can look up the deadlines in your state. Like, there are resources that are out there.
Yeah.
And then they also found that the more they could do to celebrate the act of voting, to make sure that people had time off, knew that they could take time off. A lot of people can make time for it. One of the things that was most successful, and I love that Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, as an example, did this, and so did Spotify. They encouraged their employees to come in wearing their I voted stickers and to take selfies and put them on whatever intranet system they use. So whether you're communicating with your team on Slack, or you have a different system, or whatever the internal filing chat system is, people were posting their photos and sending those in. Some companies had gave an hour or two off in the morning of election day so people could cast their ballot on the way to work. And then when you got there, there was a little party of donuts and coffee, and could hang out and talk about your experience. And all things like that can help go a long way. You become then the person who doesn't want to show up without their I voted sticker, or who wants to be involved in the party. And that spurs conversations amongst employees about, what do I need to do this? How, where do you get your information about candidates? What should I be thinking about? And all of that is helpful.
Yep. Yep. Well, that's all great stuff. And again, I think we're really well aligned with that. And in our instance, this We Vote initiative of ours came about at the suggestion of, we have a fellowship for young board members, sort of 25, 35 kind of thing. And they initiated We Vote because they said, we want our companies, the people we work for, to embrace this culture because we care about it, on the assumption that they want to keep their valued young employees and have them rise up the ranks and so forth. I guess the question that brings up is, is there evidence that makes a difference? That if people work for a company that has a strong civic ethos that encourages this kind of engagement, that it increases the bonds and the loyalty between employees and their employers?
Yeah, I mean, what we see in brand surveys and consumer surveys, both of employees and consumers, is that, especially amongst young people, they want to work at places that stand for something, and that, are valuing their employees and are paying attention and being responsive to the moment and the time that we live in. Consumers want to buy from brands that do the same and are responsible. There's obviously been a huge rise in corporate responsibility, social responsibility over the last couple of decades. You have so many different companies, really walking the talk now, which was largely generated by employee and consumer demand. To the extent, my favorite thing to say in 2019 was democracy is trending. Um, it's just, you know, I've worked, I've done this work for a long time. It was never a thing anyone wanted to talk to me about at a dinner or a bar or, you know.
And now they do.
Now they do. Everybody wants to talk about it all the time. So I think that any company that's thinking about this and not appreciating that we are, you know, we're in a real moment, people are definitely paying attention. They're looking to see people get involved. That doesn't mean that you have to take a partisan stance to do it. It's just that, you know, our democracy is in trouble. And part of the reason that it's in trouble is because every election, between 40 and 60% of Americans don't bother to participate in it. And we can't have a truly representative governing body in this country, whether that's at your local level. I mean, it could be down to your, you know, condo board or neighborhood association,
Sure.
all the way up to the Congress and President of the United States. It can't be representative when over half the country isn't making their voice heard. And so I think that, you know, people are realizing how important it is to be a part of the conversation, and companies are only going to be well suited to help be a part of that and help empower their employees to take advantage of it, because it's certainly being called upon now. And there's some great examples of people doing amazing things. Like there's a new initiative called Vote Early Day, where I think it was 25 companies put an ad in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago, reiterating the need for safe and healthy and easy voting options for their employees and consumers, and uplifting the need for states to consider vote by mail as an option. You know, that's not coming out of you know, traditional hardlining advocacy brands, but a number of companies that are new to this space, but acknowledge that's what their employees and consumers are calling for.
Sure. So I have three questions forming in my head that are all symptoms of the world as it's changed since we heard about your work on March 12th. One is the economic situation. Two is not, I mean, this is not just a function of what's happened since then, but the bitter and increasingly hyper partisanship that seems to flow through everywhere. And then third, it's kind of the, you know, what we're seeing in Pennsylvania is this enormous, like 15 times increase in the use of mail balloting. So I guess I'll throw all those out you, and you can just pick one and say, you know, does that fundamentally change the calculus? I mean, for instance, do companies who are worried about the evaporation of their clothing business or their retail business or whatever, does this still matter to them? Mail voting, you know, is it harder to promote a culture of voting in a mail voting environment? So you don't have to answer all of them, but just pick one and just give us your thoughts on that.
I mean, they're all interrelated, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think everybody's asking the question, what does this, you know, what does society, but, you know, look like in the middle of a public health crisis in a deeply partisan moment where, you know, we're seeing even today the repercussions of deep entrenched issues not be addressed. And, you know, what's happening in Minnesota right now is it's just hard to watch on so many levels. And I think that whether this inspires more people to show up and say enough is enough, I want to have a say in this process, I want to be an active and engaged member of society and my community, or it turns people off and they feel powerless, is yet to be seen. My hope is that companies understand that there is a really important role to play in making sure the latter doesn't happen, and making sure that people do feel like this is a valid venue to take out frustration. You know, I don't think I'm a voting advocate. I'm a civic engagement junkie. I think it's incredibly important, but I'm deeply aware that, you know, the 2020 election isn't going to save us or, you know, fix everybody's problems. Like, this isn't how this works. I think we often forget what government is meant to be. And like, I mean, it's a self-govern, we're a society. We are self-governing. We choose people to help speak on our behalves and make our needs known. And we let people go when they're not doing that well. And we hire other people who are. And, you know, it's more basic than people think. And it's also, it's a community action. I do think every individual vote is important. And also it is much more important what that adds up to collectively. And I think that it's just incumbent on us. It's just incumbent on us as business owners and citizens to help make sure that this stays. I mean, our democracies don't tend to last, and ours has lasted a long time, a good amount of time, and we should protect that.
Yeah.
So
I have on my bookshelf, but haven't made myself read the book, which I'm sure you've seen or read, which is Why Democracies Fail.
mhm.
I can't go there.
Yeah,
But you're right. If you're a student of history, you say, like, these things don't last forever. And, you know, I always liked reminding ourselves that this is an experiment and you have to keep experimenting or it withers and dies. But let me just zero in on the hyper partisanship for a second, because it seems, I mean, we're living in a time of deep divides and anger. And we had one of the organizations that we encouraged to vote to engage in our We Vote initiative sent something out, what we thought was an innocuous email, primary coming up, vote by mail, what have you, and got this sort of toxic blowback from one of their customers. And they were sort of, so I guess your thoughts on how companies navigate that kind of environment. What would be a response if you get that kind of a blowback from a valued customer client that said, you know, you guys are, you know, falling prey to this massive fraud. I don't want to be part of it. How dare you?
Yeah, I mean, I think well, what I can lift up and share from 2018 is that with all the companies we spoke to, and with the diversity of makeup of the staff and the consumer base, the absolute overwhelming majority of people that commented or wrote in or reached out to the companies thanked them for what they were doing. And so I was actually quite surprised by how much proactive communication they received, applauding their efforts. I didn't expect that. I had almost, you know, sort of come to terms with the fact that this was going to be like a passive engagement, the way that people engaged with what companies were doing. And the fact that there was so much positive reinforcement was great to hear. And, you know, I think it's unavoidable that some people take things, you know, however, you know, whatever way they deem to, they want to take it. I have seen what it looks like to send out one email and get pushback from a person who is incredibly liberal with one argument, and a pushback from someone incredibly conservative with another, but about the same thing. So like, it's really a matter of perspective of how you read these things. So, you know, like sending out a link to encourage someone to vote by mail as an example, just to make sure that they have the option. It's not a mandate to do it. But you know, it can be read differently by different people depending on what their perspective is. But I think it's important to remember that, you know, the overwhelming majority of people are grateful. This is true with almost every issue that we're seeing right now. the hyper partisanship and the like deep anger and sort of it's being it's overrepresented in the media in such a way that it doesn't capture some of the issues. So, I mean, this is just at the top of my mind given this week, but there's a ton of pushback in the media right now, or claims of significant pushback about vote by mail from the right. But you have all of these Republican secretaries of state all over the country working very hard to make sure that their citizens have that option to exercise their vote. The overwhelming majority of Americans are happy to have that option. And so I think we sometimes get lost in the chatter at the top, and that's not, always necessary. So I think, I would say as a business, some of the things you have to do on the outset to make sure you're not setting yourself up for failure is, make sure you actually are committing to encouraging people, regardless of what their ideology is, to actually get out and vote. I think it's worse if a CEO who is deeply engaged politically or very passionate and feels very strongly ideologically one way or the other tries to sort of hide that. I think it's instead very helpful to just address it and say, like, yeah, I support this candidate, I give to these candidates, and I deeply respect your right to either agree or disagree with me. But what I want to make sure is that you do that at the ballot box and you have the opportunity to do that. Because I think sometimes trying to sort of hide the ball is unhelpful. But just, the other thing that I would say is some of the companies that were most successful, a lot of these initiatives are driven not top down, but from staff internally, from different departments or different areas of the company. And that's also really helpful because then you get a good diversity of opinion and you get buy-in, and somebody can say to you, we do this all the time. Somebody will say to us like, well, that actually leans this way or this way. And like, you don't want to use that language. It means different things to different people. And that gut check is always helpful. Yeah. And I would just say to my original point about, this is trending. One of my favorite stories, it was by a company that didn't end up participating in the case study with us, but someone shared with us that they weren't ready to run a voter registration program in 2018. They were going to wait and develop a clearer program until the CEO of the company kept traveling around the country to different headquarters or offices and was walking in and seeing voter registration booths that their employees were just taking their own initiative to set up. And it was sort of a like, I got to catch up now with this. And I think that's where a lot of this is heading. How that gets organized while it's remote is, still to be seen. But
yeah, that's a great point. Well, let's put a wrap on this. But tell us about something that you are looking forward to between now and the November election that you really care about and that you think will make a difference in this space in which you've been working in.
Looking forward to summer. And some nice weather and some more smiling faces in the world. But, there's so many exciting things between now and the election. And, some of my favorite are the real cultural moments. There's National Voter Registration Day. That is on September 22nd. There is Vote Early Day, a sort of celebration of, taking advantage of opportunities to vote before Election Day, and that's on October 24th. And then there's the Super Bowl of democracy in November. So there's so much to do. And I would just say, especially in a year where people may be more inclined to vote early or by absentee ballot, it's really important to make sure you're registered to vote and registered at your current address. I will just tell you transparently, I've never missed an election. I vote all the time. And I moved recently and I assumed Washington, D.C. has same day registration. I assumed I would just register when I went to the polls for our primary, which is also on Tuesday. And I'm having to vote absentee, and that I realized, luckily, weeks in advance, I have to get registered in order to get my ballot at this address. And so people will forget that little detail. But if you've moved, just quickly update your registration so you have the opportunity when it comes time as we get closer to the election.
Yeah, it feels like something would be helpful to maybe enlist realtors or apartment brokers or whatever in that pursuit. It ought to be part of your like welcome wagon package, you know, when you walk into the new apartment or the new house or whatever.
Well, I have to credit where credit is due. The United States Postal Service has a, when you go to change your address, the My Move change of address form, they have a registration option, which is great.
Well, that's good. It's good to hear. They've certainly,
I learned to forward my mail and get registered.
yeah, it's a twofer. Well, Ashley Spillane, thanks for joining us. I'm just going to close out with again, a couple of reminders to folks here in Pennsylvania, June 2nd primary. One critical detail, you have to have your mail ballot in the hands of election officials by 8 p.m. on election day, June 2nd. Voting in person is absolutely an option. I actually don't think the polls are going to be crowded, so just be safe. But if you want to show up, show up. Again, Ashley, thanks for your leadership and encouragement, and we look forward to working with you down the trail.
Thank you. Happy voting.
Okay.